What does my grief actually look and feel like? The only time that I can remember feeling grief specifically related to death is when my exes, who is still a very close friend, when her cat Sophie passed last year. Uh, we had lived together for 6 years, and I had known her and her cat for about a decade at that point. And I remember in the weeks that followed, I'd be fine most of the time, but then I'd suddenly be hit by waves of emotion coupled with a real feeling of nausea. And I either wanted to be alone or with my ex and her now husband because we could all connect over this grief. Um, my personal pitfalls or coping mechanisms. So, my grieving process does actually include the body scan check in discussed in class on October 15th. And this is a result of therapy grounded in pain management. Since I'm constantly in pain due to damage to my spinal cord, I've had to learn to live with my physical pain, which begins by fully acknowledging its existence. As far as my grief role models, I've definitely had to forge my own path when it comes to grieving. I grew up in an emotionally as well as physically abusive household, and this led to depersonalization in response to trauma, as discussed in the assigned course media on Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. This depersonalization became my coping mechanism for much of my early life. So there are large chunks of especially traumatic times that are completely missing from my memory. Now, as an adult, I've hopefully adopted healthier grieving strategies, which, with much of that reflecting the same ways in which I've learned to cope with my loss of health, as mentioned earlier. The meaning which I've found that allows me to cope is working within disability studies to improve the lives of others who have similar conditions. This has also helped me to accept my own inevitable death, as I know that my body will go towards disability research when I'm dead. Mary Roach, discussing the donations of organs after death and How to Know If You're Dead, states on page 195 that to be able, as a dead person, to make a gift of this magnitude is phenomenal. And while my body will not be going directly to any individual, I believe the donation to medical science is a similar magnitude of gift, which gives me a similar continuing meaning. Now, for how my signature compares to the official stories of grief, well, both of my interviewees, as well as myself, have long been aware of the illegitimacy of the five stages of grief as an accurate grief model. Although I was not aware until watching the assigned SciShow video on the five stages of grief that the reason for this illegitimacy is that it was developed by studying the grief not of those grieving for someone else, but while they were dying themselves. Uh, as far as coping ugly, which, as discussed in our October 6th lecture, are thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that might, to an outside observer, look selfish, inappropriate, callous, or bizarre. Uh, if I can see any of that in my own process, it would be a little bit of the self soothing humor. Now, for disenfranchised grief, if I've ever felt that my grief was judged or misunderstood, while there were certainly times where this happened during childhood, uh, as I mentioned earlier, I don't really have many of those memories. So within memory, no. Uh, I've really worked to surround myself with people who are accepting and respectful of the personal feelings and experiences of others, in part because I know what it's like to lack that support system. And this is a sentiment that was reflected in full by both of my interviewees. For this same reason, all three of us do what we can to avoid judging the grief of others as well. Uh, so, based on my own personal experience and reflections, do I believe that there it really is a way to truly grieve properly? No, neither myself nor my interviewees believe that there is such a thing as a proper way to grieve. This is in line with the words of Dr. Hernandez on October 3rd, and certainly other times as well, when he emphasized that there is no correct way to grieve. And as far as a more compassionate and realistic approach to others' grief, I think that it's what myself and my friends have been doing of just surrounding yourselves with a support system that does not judge your own grief and is simply there for you without feeling like it's a transactional interaction between individuals.